Hi everyone, so let's now get into the details of the new topic, which is your economic impact of the British rule in India. So let's try to see that over a period of time. Like 1757 was the time when Battle of Plassey happened, then 64 Battle of Buxar, and 65 they assumed the Diwani rights of the eastern regions, which was a first, the step related to economic control that you could see. And then till this time, till 1857, because economic causes were also one of the major causes for the revolt of 1857 to have occurred. Therefore, we would have to clearly see that within this time or between this time, what are the things that have happened which can be considered as the economic impact of their rule during this period of time, almost 100 years. First impact, a very, very major impact, was the disruption of the traditional economy. A very clear picture. Why? Because our traditional economy was very self-sufficient. We have seen, if you remember, 18th century socio-economic conditions right in the beginning when we were doing the decline of the Mughal Empire and then the rise of the different states. After that, I had taken a brief section on this topic, and that was the reason. Okay, so if you don't remember, do check that video, because until you understand the pre-colonial social and the economic situation, how will you understand about the impact that they had made positive or negative or whatever. Like you need to compare them. So one was basically about the disruption of the traditional economy, the economy, because the kind of system that we had, like ठीक एग्रीकल्चर की अगर हम बात करें, हम सेल्फ सफिशिएंट एग्रीकल्चर में थे and we were just doing very good economically. Now what happened when they came? Their main interest was exploitation of the Indian resources. They just wanted to exploit us. They wanted to enrich the British people at the cost of the Indian people. They were not favoring this idea that we have to see for the welfare of the Indian people. Their whole idea was the enrichment of the British people and somehow exploiting the Indian people. Whatever we need to do wrong or right with them, it was not their concern. The betterment of the British people was their concern. Then there was adverse impact of this on the peasantry, artisans and the ruling class. Of course it would be, क्योंकि peasants को तो परेशानी होगी क्योंकि land revenue उतना निकल के नहीं आएगा. Artisans की बात करते हैं तो इनके products जो हैं अब वो बिकते नहीं थे because industrial revolution था, and ruling class के साथ तो of course they were controlling them. So land revenue policies are a major thing that we have covered in the previous video, so everything related to it would also be a part of it. Just check from that. Trade restrictions were there. Now the Indians were not having the freedom that they could trade as per their will. It is now the British that was trading actually. Market domination of the British, the conquests of the British. Then ruin of the Indian agriculture, the way we were having the self-sufficiency here. Trade ka ruin karna, industries ko ruin karna. Self-sufficiency of the village destroyed, as I just said. And Indian economy transformed into the colonial economy. Next is about the ruin of peasantry in agriculture. So how the peasantry and the agriculture were impacted, that we have already seen when we did the topic of impact of land revenue settlement in the previous video. Like the peasantry जो ये owners थे, ये सिर्फ एक आपके जो हैं renters जो हैं वो बन के रह गए थे kind of. उसके अलावा लैंड होल्डिंग इनके पास से ख़त्म हो गई थी. एग्रीकल्चर की प्रोडक्टिविटी अब वैसी नहीं बची थी. नीदर द गवर्नमेंट नॉर द जमींदार वाज विलिंग टू इंक्रीज द लैंड रेवेन्यू प्रोडक्शन एक्सेट्रा. So just check that section from the previous video and this part will be covered. Next is your impact on the ruin of the old zamindars and the rise of the new landed classes. क्योंकि धीरे धीरे gradually when the system of zamindari system or the permanent settlement got replaced by the other systems like Mahalwari and Reotwari, so there was rise of this new landed class. As you remember, I have talked about the debt trap and all of that, money lenders then. So these two groupings like money lenders and the merchants, they emerged, and the old zamindars were not having that much of hold or control over the people and the system that was existing. Then ruin of the artisans, craftsmen, resulting in deindustrialization and ruralization of Indian economy. Now you understand about how the artisans and the craftsmen were ruined, because the whole idea of British was that we have to buy the cheaper material from India, export it outside, and then the produced goods, machine-made goods, because of the industrial revolution, they would bring back in India and sell it at a higher price. So lower price for the raw materials and higher price for the made goods already. So यहाँ जो local artisans या craftsmen थे उनके तो कला का कोई पूछ ही नहीं बचा, because it was all about the British machine-made goods now. But these two concepts you have to understand. So firstly we'll discuss on deindustrialization, then we'll talk on the ruralization part. Okay, so firstly this we'll discuss here. Now what is this deindustrialization? So if you just reverse it with the keyword industrialization, so industrialization would be about setting up of industries and all of that, and when this will be reversed, that would be called as deindustrialization. So deindustrialization is the process of continued industrial decline. The industry is continuing to decline is deindustrialization, because there was destruction of the traditional Indian craft industry, and that we have seen, right? तो यहाँ के लोकल इंडस्ट्रीज़ जो हैं वो धीरे धीरे डिस्ट्रॉय हो रहे थे, डिस्ट्रक्शन हो रहा था, डिक्लाइन हो रही थी. स्पेशली द कॉटन इंडस्ट्रीज़ विच एट वन पॉइंट ऑफ टाइम वॉज द मोस्ट फेमस बिकॉज ऑफ द skills of the craftsmen and because of the fine quality of cotton. And because of the industrial revolution in Britain, what was happening, as I just said, that they were just reducing us to an exporter of the raw material and importer of the finished goods here. So Indian wealth was all in the hands of the British. They were using this money from here, they were using it for their own advantage, and we had the destruction of the traditional industries. And what were the causes of the deindustrialization? Firstly, the British started to have free trade with India. We have seen that they wanted to have the trade control. Initially they asked for the farmans from the Mughal emperors, and then gradually they even took over all the territories under their control. Now when they took over all the territories under their control, of course they started to have free trade with India. They would not pay for any trading. So India ko jo revenue thoda earlier they were getting the revenue because of trade, now they were not getting it. So industries chalengi kaise? So that led to the decline. Then misuse of the political power by British. So they had come here as a trading power, then they expanded themselves as a political power. They started to conquer the regions and started to misuse them also, because they were using the methods like extortion, forcefulness, coercion, etc. to get the things at the cheaper price from India. Then creation of the buyer market, East India Company market. Buyer market at the cost of seller. Matlab, what was happening now, the whole idea was not about the welfare of the seller. Sellers were the Indians. So they were not worried about the welfare of the sellers. The whole idea, they created a market where it was only about the monopoly of the buyer, which was East India Company. Otherwise in a market what happens? Both the buyer and the seller will have their own say. And the market will be regulated based on the requirements and the position of both the buyer and the seller. But here in this case what was happening, they just created a buyer oriented market. Seller, I mean the Indians were not having any say here. Then westernization of Indian educated middle class. तो उनको भी westernization पसंद था, तो western products was more appealing to them than the traditional stuffs here in India. Railways की वजह से क्या होने लग गया, now they could exploit more. They were using the raw materials and transporting it to the different parts of the country, and then using it further for trade with the different parts of the world also. Lack of government support, of course British government भी तो exploitation में ही मदद कर रही थी. Then import restrictions, जो भी सामान बाहर से आना था उस पर इन्होंने restriction लगा दिए, so that ruined the foreign market of Indian artisans. Indian artisans के सामान ना तो अब ढंग से बाहर जा पा रहे थे, ना बाहर से उनका कुछ trade अच्छे से हो पा रहा था. So all of these factors resulted in the declining of the industries, which we call as deindustrialization. What about this other feature which is called as ruralization or peasantization of Indian economy? Now see, very very important factor that you have to remember. Now what was happening? There was of course increasing dependence of population always on the agriculture for subsistence here. Anyways, agriculture was a major factor or a major sector on which people were relying. But we had two major groups in the villages. One was of your peasants, okay? Another was of your artisans. Now because of the declining condition of the artisans, क्योंकि अगर इनके सामान ही कोई नहीं खरीदेगा, if the people will not buy the products of these artisans or craftsmen, what will they do? Peasants, at least even if they were exploited, they had the option that they can produce the crops and at least they can feed themselves. At least they had this option. But what would the artisans or the craftsmen do because of deindustrialization? So now what started to happen in the village economy was that increasing dependence of the people started to happen on the agriculture, because they had to go for subsistence, they had to survive. They couldn't just only think about trading or selling, they had to survive first of all. An increasing tendency was noticed in the people to produce the agricultural goods, that will produce more and more of goods and raw materials. And Of course, that also resulted in neglection of the industrial development, because everybody was now focusing towards agriculture, which was at least give them something to feed upon, something for their subsistence, which the industries was not able to give because of deindustrialization. So now India had become from the largest exporter of the cotton goods in the world. In the pre-colonial time, India was now transformed into importer of cotton goods. अब ये बाहर के cotton सामान यूज़ करते थे और यहाँ से सिर्फ raw cotton export होके बाहर जाता था. So definitely this was a problem. And what is this ruralization or peasantization? जैसा हमने बोला कि Indian economy में now everybody was focused towards agriculture sector and becoming a peasant because they had to survive. Of course ये कॉटन वाला जो इशू था, दैट अटेम्प्ट्स वर टेकन ड्यूरिंग द इंडियन नेशनल मूवमेंट, जो हम अगले फेज़ में बाद में करेंगे, to revive this sector of the industries and cotton products etc. But before that, at least, this was a problem that they had to face. Next impact, economic impact अगर हम समझेंगे, that is your commercialization of agriculture. So agriculture was happening but in a commercialized manner. What is meant by this, or what does this mean? That there was production of crops now, because in agriculture you will have to have the production of crops. So there indeed was production of crops, but that was happening for sale in the market. It was not happening for family consumption. The whole idea was to have it for the sale in the market. ठीक है, कि हम कैश क्रॉप्स जो कि जिसको बेचा जा सकता है, नॉट फॉर द कंजम्पशन, नॉट फॉर द ईटेबल्स, बट कैश क्रॉप्स जिसको बाहर बेचेंगे तो हमें फ़ायदा होगा, ठीक है, अपने कंजम्पशन के लिए नहीं. इससे क्या होने लगा, देयर वाज एक्सप्लॉयटेशन ऑफ द इंडियन पेजेंट्स, क्योंकि दे हैड टू सप्लाई दोज प्रोड्यूस एट द लोअर प्राइस, तो उनके अपने कंजम्पशन के लिए ज़्यादा कुछ बचता नहीं था. एंड ऑल्सो द इंडियन कल्टिवेटर्स वर फोर्स्ड टू सेल देम टू ब्रिटेन एट लो कॉस्ट, ठीक है, कम दाम पे उनको बेचना पड़ता था. एंड दे were again forced to grow these cash crops against their wishes. They wanted to have those crops which they could consume, they could help their family with, but they were forced कि नहीं आप ऐसे ही crops को produce करो जो कि हम बाहर बेच सकें. Market instability होने लगी, because see, there will not always be a similar kind of demand even for the cash crops, no? Let's say products like indigo etc, जिसको आप खाओगे नहीं, ठीक है, तो there would always be fluctuating demand which will result in market instability. So of course it will lead to poverty, because problem was कि export तो decline हो जाएगा. If there is lesser demand, there will be lesser export, but taxes जो इनको देने पड़ते थे वो तो reduce नहीं हो रहा था. There was no concession or reduction in the taxes. So that was a problem. It resulted in poverty. फेमीन्स की अगर हम बात करें, सूखे की बात करते हैं, अकाल की बात करते हैं बेसिकली. सो लैंड वॉज फॉलिंग आउट ऑफ कल्टिवेशन. वाई? बिकॉज द कैश क्रॉप्स की वजह से जो सॉइल होती है, ठीक है, इट विल नॉट बी लेफ्ट दैट फर्टाइल ऑन विच यू कैन then produce the food crops. So land was kind of getting wasted and the quality was deteriorating. So land was falling out of cultivation and it was not profitable anymore. The land to be used was not profitable anymore. There was substitution of food grains for the commercial crops, ठीक है, क्योंकि फूड ग्रेन्स जो इनके खाने के लिए, सब्सिस्टेंस के लिए, कंजम्पशन के लिए यूज़ हो सकता था, now that was substituted by the commercial crops. Then impoverishment of India of course happened overall, ठीक है, because now they had to just be dependent on the things coming from outside, and यहाँ से जो resources हैं they were just going out and there was no welfare for the Indians despite of the usage of the Indian products. Next is your drain of wealth. Drain of wealth मतलब that wealth is being drained from a region. What is draining? It happens from one side, ठीक है. ड्रेनिंग इज़ लाइक एक तरफ से सब कुछ निकल रहा है. इफ़ बोथ वे ट्रांसफ़र ऑफ द वेल्थ वुड हैव हैपेंड देन तो वो ट्रेड हो जाता, बट ओनली वन वे वेल्थ वॉज गोइंग, ड्रेनिंग, ठीक है, ख़त्म हो रहा है. हाउ वॉज इट हैपनिंग? सो दैट इज़ द कंटिन्यूअस ट्रांसफ़र ऑफ वेल्थ फ्रॉम इंडिया टू इंग्लैंड, and for which the Indians were not getting or receiving any adequate economic or material return. That is what I said, one way transfer, because if return was happening वो तो trade हो जाता, but draining was happening, so only one way outing was done from India to England for all the resources that they had. Now what could be the subcomponents of this drain of wealth? First, the land revenue collected from Bengal began to be used to buy goods in India for export, ठीक है, कि जो लैंड रेवेन्यू इन्होंने बंगाल से कलेक्ट करते थे मोस्टली ईस्टर्न साइड से, वो क्या करते थे, इंडिया में ही सामान खरीदने के लिए यूज़ करते थे फॉर द एक्सपोर्ट. सो द इंडियंस मनी वॉज यूज फॉर द ब्रिटिश प्रॉफिट. Then home charges. What are the home charges? So salaries and pensions. Home मतलब ब्रिटिश के जो अपने चार्जेस होते थे in their home means ब्रिटेन में, not in India but in Britain they had to, Britain as in ब्रिटेन के लोगों के लिए the charges that they had to use, for example to pay for the salaries and pensions of the East India Company employees, which otherwise should have come from their home na, from the British government, but they were using the Indians money only to pay to their employees. Then whatever interest they were taking, ठीक है, I mean whatever loans were they taking, ईस्ट इंडिया कंपनी जो भी लोन लेती थी उस पर इंटरेस्ट पे करना होता था, वो भी यहीं से आता था. देन डिविडेंड्स टू द स्टॉक होल्डर्स ऑफ ईस्ट इंडिया कंपनी एट्सेट्रा. देन ब्राइब्स, पेमेंट्स टू बैंक्स, कंपनीज एट्सेट्रा, ये तो प्रॉब्लम था ही. एंड इंटरेस्ट ऑन द फॉरेन कैपिटल इन्वेस्टमेंट, वट एवर इन्वेस्टमेंट दे वर मेकिंग इन द फॉरेन मार्केट ऑल्सो, वहाँ भी उनको कुछ इंटरेस्ट पे करना पड़ेगा. सो ऑल ऑफ दैट वॉज कमिंग फ्रॉम हियर इंग्लैंड, ब्रिटेन्स इंडिया से लेते थे और इंग्लैंड जाता था. So that was drain of wealth that was happening. Another impact was of course poverty and famine, that need not be said, that was the implication of all the other impacts basically. So poverty now had actually became a kind of a man-made feature because it was the impact of the people's initiative that has resulted in this pathetic situation for the Indians. Then plunder of Bengal, industrial revolution in Britain, all of these became the factors. फेमीन, रेन फेलियर से तो होता ही था, वॉर्स भी रीज़न हो जाते थे, ब्रिटिश की पॉलिसीज़ भी रीज़न हो जाती थी, एंड देन देयर वाज नो इनिशिएटिव बाय द ब्रिटिश गवर्नमेंट टू मैनेज इट. देन राइज ऑफ द मॉडर्न इंडस्ट्रीज अंडर द ब्रिटिश. सो इन द लेटर फेज व्हाट हैपेंड, द ट्रेडिशनल इंडस्ट्रीज़ की तो हमारी डिक्लाइन हो गई, बट दे स्टार्टेड टू कम अप विद सर्टेन मॉडर्न इंडस्ट्रीज बिलोंगिंग टू डिफरेंट सेक्टर्स, be it about press or infrastructure like roads or railways or postal system and telegraph, but all of these things were made for their own benefit. ठीक है, it was not made for the benefit of Indians, although in the later phase in the national movement time we do see that they played a role, but the intention was for their own benefit. And ये prelims में से questions आते हैं, so you have to remember about some of the important nationalists who have critiqued about it, who have talked about the economic impact and who were known as the economic critique of the British rule. So please do remember their name: Dadabhai Naoroji, R.C. Dutt, M.G. Ranade, etc. Dadabhai Naoroji, who has talked about this drain of wealth theory and has written this in his book Poverty and Un-British Rule in India. So such kind of topics are asked in the paper, prelims के factual pointers हैं. R.C. Dutt has written the economic history of India. So all of these people are talking about the economic critique of the British policies. So please remember these points, and here I end the discussion on the economic impact also. Then I'll meet you in the next week with the next set of topics. Thank you so much. Take care till then. Bye bye.